Hello and greetings. So today we are going to discuss about theories 2, which is records, classification, taxonomy. So we are going to start off by discussing about the definitions of classification. What is classification? So let's go through it. So classification is a process of putting things together. So we categorize them by similar things, and classification is a group of records related by common characteristics. So there are numbers of common characteristics when we classify something. Next is, what is the objectives of identifying and arranging records in accordance with an approved filing systems? So first, it can be located at any times. It can also be located and be done by only one person. And it is much more convenient in terms of times, efforts, and expenditures. When we talk about taxonomy classifications, we must know that it is a practice and science of classification of things or concepts. Basically, it uses hierarchical classification. So what is hierarchical classification? To simplify it, it is when we discuss of a larger groups or a larger topics to a subgroup or subtopics. Taxonomy classification in organization is based on the business activities. So we are going to look into these three major components. The first one being broad encompassing categories called functions, narrow subsets of its functions called activities, yet narrower and more specific subsets of activities called transactions. To illustrate this better, let's look in the context of university. People are sitting in a larger group, and then we are divided into different expertise, which are academic, administrative, and many more. So each classes have their own businesses. When we receive data from students, then we focus on one section, which is the department. We can say mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, and then we focus on the course outlined. We narrow it to programs, the scheme, and also the teaching and learning programs. So basically, we classify them from a bigger subject to sub-subject. So that's what we call hierarchical classification. So now let's look into the business content in taxonomy classification. So we have three important components right here, which are subject, organizational, and functional. Let's look into the subject first. Subject, based on the topic or subject terms, generally arranged in alphabetical order, such as vendor name, typically developed within a business unit. So subject base is basically quite general. Organizational, however, reflects the organizational structure. Is familiar to users and often mimics the paper-based filing structures. So basically, when we look into the university context, organizational is the organizational chart, for example, chancellor, vice chancellor, and etc. Then we look into the functional, which is based on the high-level purpose or responsibility managed by the organization to fulfill its goal and the activities. Let's go ahead and develop a taxonomy classification scheme by using subject example given. So you can see over here, there are two taxonomy breakdown structures, which are first, differences, and second is similarities. Okay, let's look into the example here. I would like you to guess first before we go to a deeper explanation. So we have the market here. And then we go into supermarket, night market, farmer's market right here. Narrow it into fish, chicken, meat, vegetables, or wet stuff and dry stuff. So, can you guess? Can you try to explain based on the structure that we have learned before? Let's move on. Okay, now when we look at the market right here, it is quite broad, isn't it? But it also shares the same functions. So let's narrow it down into three different markets, which is supermarket, night market, and farmers market. So this one is much more narrow and it describes the activities of the market. Now, okay, for each of the market, we can also narrow it down deeper. What are the goods that are sold in each of the markets? So let's start off with the supermarket. For example, we have fish, chicken, meat, vegetables, or we can also classify it into wet stuff and dry stuff. So this one is much more narrower, and we can call it as transactions. So best practices for records. It is recommended that we use no more than 3 levels below the top level functions. Okay, so what if there are more than 3 subsets? Okay, don't worry, I can explain more. So let's take a look at the market, which is quite broad, and it's the same function as supermarket, night market, farmers market. So let's take a look at supermarket. Now, in supermarket, we sell fish, chicken, meat, and vegetables. But for each of these goods, we can also divide it into a much more narrow classification, which is the types of the fish, which is salmon fish, saba fish, fish fillet, and many more. And then the chickens, we can divide it into drumstick, wings, half-cut chicken, follows the meat, vegetables. The vegetables, we can have different kind of vegetables, so that is when we have more than 3 subsets. Okay, let's take a look at the differences in taxonomy. So taxonomy classifications allows users to see the different breakdowns among each subjects or functions. So the differences described as various subsets under specific subjects or function that may be related to each other. So I'm going to illustrate this better for you. Let's go look into the market, which is quite broad, and then we can go to supermarket, the activities, and the transactions are groceries, clothing, and sports. So under this transaction, we can also add another subset, which is the frozen foods, dairy, cheese, and eggs. So these are the example under the groceries, and then we have women clothes, men clothes for the clothing transaction, the sports, and many more. Now remember, when we talk about taxonomy classification, we have the differences and also the similarities. So now let's take a look at the similarities of taxonomy. Okay, in taxonomy classification, it allows user to see the similarities breakdowns among each subjects or functions. So the similarities describe the subset under specific subject or function to have recognized similar transaction related to each other, which may give clear understanding of each function to the users. So let's go back to the market, which is the broad function, and then we have the activities, which are the supermarket, night market, and farmers market. So under them we have the transactions. Let's take a look at the similarity subset for the transaction. Let's go to the groceries. So under groceries we also have fish, and also here, right here, we have 2 fishes on the night market and also farmers market. So we see the similarities of subset for this transaction. Functional classification schemes. So what are we looking at here? We have 3 different components. So the first one being determine your organization's business needs. Second, determine the purpose of your taxonomy. And last one, identifying the right taxonomy. So basically, we need the right heading for particular subtopics or subgroups. Let's take a look at this example. Procurement unit. Under procurement unit, we have 3 clusters, which are sourcing, purchasing, and also assets. And then under sourcing, what are the businesses? We have supplier management, negotiate contract. Under purchasing, we have purchase requisitions, invoice payments, and many more. So let's go into a simpler example. Let's take a look at this example right here, talent management unit. So before we proceed with the explanation, we can have HRM before we can divide it into different units. So one of it is talent management unit. So now let's go deeper. We can have different clusters here: sourcing, performance management, compensations, leadership development. So under sourcing, what do we have? Recruitment. And then performance management, what do we have? KPI. Compensations, we have bonus and benefits. Leadership development, we have training. So this is the example that is much more simpler because you can relate, because you are in organizations and all organizations have HRM and talent management unit. Now that you have learned about taxonomy classifications and the importance of it, so go ahead, simplify your file structure. See you next time. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.